All right, and welcome back to the forecast card. Unfortunately, another day of basically going even. One game left in UNLV. It's not going great. I believe they're down by 7 points with about 8 minutes left as the time I'm recording this. Still far from over, but obviously not the spot I would like to be in. Hopefully they lock back in, but yeah, their offense is just atrocious. Their defense is playing great, but they can't make a basket to save their life. So I'm really hoping that changes to end off the game. Yeah, I'm not really going to go into many of these games, just a couple of the annoying ones. American, that was just funny. I don't know if anyone looked at that game, but they scored 40 points and still covered 3.5. There's 76 points basically in that game total. Absolutely pathetic offensive teams. And like these aren't even good defensive teams. Like they're both in the bottom 300. The fact that this game only had 76 points is just yeah, I don't really know what to say. If they didn't cover that game, I would have been very pissed. Where you keep your other team to 36 and you don't win the game. Anyway, that was just a awful game. Delaware, dog shit. Elon, dog shit. Radford, dog shit. Prairie View, super dog shit. They lose that game outright to Arkansas Pine Bluff, a team that lost to Mississippi Valley State. So just embarrassing. Kentucky, that game was covering pretty much for 38 minutes, and then Alabama just hit like 2 clutch threes at the end of the game. Yeah, it is what it is. Texas Southern, pretty much sweat-free. Ohio, sweat-free. San Diego State. I would basically call this a backdoor. They're winning by 1 with about 2 minutes left, and they somehow lose the game by 8. And Omaha, relatively sweat-free, though did get a little bit sweaty near the end. I think they only won that game by 8. But yeah, obviously not a fantastic day. But honestly, considering how some Saturdays have went, I will very much take a even or slightly losing day. So I'll update the record tomorrow once I know the final result of the UNLV game. Anyway, let's get into the 6 games that I like for tomorrow. All right, heading on to game number 1, we have IU Indianapolis heading on the road to play Northern Kentucky. Now, on paper, I don't think these teams are really that far apart. Obviously, the biggest weakness that IU Indianapolis has is that they have a horrendous defense. They are, bottom 5, not even bottom 5%, just straight up bottom 5 defensive team. But I do think on the other side, although Northern Kentucky is a better defensive team, IU Indianapolis is a very good offensive team. Well, not very good, but they're significantly better, almost 100 rating points higher in offense efficiency than Northern Kentucky is. Obviously, they're a bit less of a consistent team, and they have played an easier schedule. But they're a team that can get hot from 3 at any point. They get a fair amount of points off steals. They're pretty good on the offensive glass. They're a really, really good free throw shooting team. And on the other side, Northern Kentucky, one of the worst free throw shooting teams in college basketball. The only shot that they shoot really that well is mid-range. And it's something that they do rely on very heavily. Getting points off steals. But despite the fact that IU Indianapolis is a really bad team defensively, the one thing that they do decently well, almost a top 100 team, is minimizing turnovers. They don't turn the ball over that much. So, like one of Northern Kentucky's core point scoring methods is going to be weakened, and I think IU Indianapolis here in this revenge spot is going to find success. Now, these two teams have already played, and I think they played when, in my opinion, Northern Kentucky was playing better, and IU Indianapolis was playing worse. Last time they played, this was all the way back in December, and that was right before IU Indianapolis lost their biggest losing streak. That was the first game that triggered it. They lost by 2 at home to Northern Kentucky. In this point, this was when Northern Kentucky had their longest win streak. They had won 5. So I think now we're getting IU Indianapolis with some confidence in this game, where they're already headed off the road. This isn't a very far travel spot for them. Both of these teams are in Kentucky. So we're getting them in a short travel spot. Meanwhile, Northern Kentucky is on their is going to be on their first home game after 3 road games. But their last game was on the 21st, so they're only going to have 1 day's rest. Meanwhile, IU Indianapolis is going to be on 3 days rest. And one of the unique stats here for this IU Indianapolis team is that they're 6-1 against the spread with the rest advantage. So I think they're going to play hard the entire game. Arguably, this Northern Kentucky team is going to be having to travel further than them and be on less rest. Yeah, I think this is a great spot. 9.5 seems like a little bit too big. I think this is going to be like a 5 or 6 point win for Northern Kentucky. Yeah, give me IU Indianapolis here. to cover on the road on this really, really hefty spread. All right, and back to my favorite bet of the day. The only time I ever bet Seton Hall is when they're playing against another shitty team or they're playing in a really good spot. But against Xavier, one of the best teams in college basketball lately, a top 50 team, they've been playing incredibly well. And in the Big East, I think they need to get a few more solid wins under their belt to kind of lock in their tournament odds. Because they have been a very good team this year. They're 17-10, but they're actually due for some positive regression. And the Seton Hall team, their season has been over for a while. They don't have any hatred for the Xavier team, as far as I understand. So it's not like they're going to be playing extra hard for any given reason. And I think Xavier is going to show up for this game, knowing that if they could end this season off with a 20-10 record, they have a much better chance here at having any kind of shot at making the tournament. So I think Xavier is going to show up to this game. On paper, they're a significantly better offensive and defensive team. Top 40 offense, top 30 defense. Seton Hall, not even a top 250 offense and not even a top 100 defense. We're getting the much, much better team here. Seton Hall has played really bad in front of their home crowd. I think Xavier is going to light it up from three. They're going to find a lot of success in the paint. They're going to force a ton of turnovers. Seton Hall, the only thing they're going to be able to do well is get offensive boards. But again, I think Xavier is going to be playing with a lot of chutzpah in this moment. They have way more to play for than Seton Hall, who's basically expecting their entire team to probably be completely de-gutted. But on paper, Seton Hall at home falls outside the top 200. Xavier plays just as well on the road as they do at home. They're a very consistent team all across the board. And they do beat up the shit out of these, top 100, top 200 teams like Seton Hall. They are a top 25 team when playing against these kind of competition. Obviously, the only biggest issue here is they just had 2 home wins. Now they're heading on the road in a pretty hefty travel spot where they're traveling over 500 miles. And over 500 miles, they have lost their last 4 games. But if you look at them, they played UConn, Creighton, Villanova, St. John's. Their 4 long road games have been against top 10, top 20 teams. And Villanova is just another beast when they're playing at home. So I think this is going to be a different spot here where they're not going to be necessarily playing worse. As road dogs this year, they're 2-0 against the spread. Seton Hall as home favorites, as home underdogs, 3-4. And Xavier, I think Xavier is just going to show up. This line seems a little bit too short. I think Xavier wins this game by 10 easily. My only concern, obviously, is a backdoor. But I'm taking Xavier here on the single-digit spread. All right, heading on to the third game. We have Kansas City heading on the road to play South Dakota State. Now, I just think South Dakota State is miles above this Kansas City team in a lot of ways. South Dakota State, when they're playing at home, they are a very, very solid offensive team. They dominate the boards, something that UMKC has not defended well this year. They're a very good mid-range three-point shooting team. And on the other side, this UMKC team, they kind of rely very heavily on threes. And that's one of the things that South Dakota State defends the best, their top 75 three-point defense. And getting that against a team on the road is usually a good recipe for success. And they also like to get offensive boards, where South Dakota State is a top 50 team at defending their own glass. So everything that UMKC wants to do in this matchup is going to be harder for them. And South Dakota State is just being the better team that's played much harder schedule. And they play really good at home. At least they have lately. At home, they move up from they basically play at what their expected rating is. They have a top 160, top 170 home advantage. Meanwhile, Kansas City, they significantly dip when they hit out on the road. They drop almost outside the top 300. When they're playing at home, they're inside the top 200. So we're getting a team where they're playing really poorly. As of lately, they're like borderline not in the top 300 anymore, based off their most recent success. And the category of teams that South Dakota State plays the best against are these teams that are outside the top 200, like Kansas City. They really do like to show up big time. We're getting South Dakota State off a really tough loss against their rival, North Dakota State. And Kansas City is going to be in a true travel spot, while South Dakota State has been able to just stay home. And this is a 300-mile travel spot, and the last times UMKC has had to travel that far They lost all 4 games, most of them being pretty big blowouts to teams of South Dakota State's quality. So I think this is going to be a 10-point win for South Dakota State. I think they're the way better team coming off a pretty emotional loss, and they're going to let out their tempers a little bit, kind of get locked in for this tournament. Yeah, give me South Dakota State at home, -8.5. All right, now the final game, and theoretically my favorite game of the night. We're getting UCF at home in what I would say is a really solid get-right spot. On paper, Utah has been the better team. I don't think anyone's contesting that. But I think it's a decent matchup for UCF. I think they're going to have to shoot a bit more outside of the paint. But that's typically where they've had the most success. They're not even that good of a near basket team, even though that's where they take a lot more of their shots. I think that's going to be an advantage because they are going to have an offensive board glass opportunity here. And if they're shooting, it's much easier to get boards when you're shooting 3-pointers and mid-range shots. So I like this get-right spot for UCF. I think obviously they had like one really, really good game, and then since that game, they've kind of been putting up stinkers. They're on a really, really rough stretch. If you look at their most recent games, they lost 6-7 in a row. Most of them were pretty much double-digit losses. None of them were really that competitive, except for the one against Kansas. But this is still a team that like blew out TCU, did really good against Arizona State, beat Colorado, beat Texas Tech. They have the ability in themselves to be an elite team, beat Texas A&M. Utah, on the other hand, also a very good team, but this is a massive letdown spot for them, in my opinion. They're a team that plays really, really good at home, and on paper, they don't play well anywhere else. If you look at their most recent wins, let's just start. Let's start within their last 8 games. They were at home against Cincy. They won. Went on the road, lost. Went home, won. Went on 2 road games, lost. Now they went home, won 2 in a row. And guess what? They're going back on the road. Plus, we're getting UCF. They just came off 2 tough losses against Oklahoma State and Colorado. Obviously, Utah's going to have a bit of a rest advantage in this spot, but it's not as significant in my opinion because it's still 3 days rest. If you could argue that it's too long of a rest for Utah, getting 5 days off. And with a rest disadvantage, it hasn't really impacted UCF that much. They're 2-3 against the spread. And with a rest advantage, Utah's only 4-4. So I don't think rest has really had too big of an impact here. And we're getting Utah in a spot where they have significantly not covered the spread very much this year. They're 1-6 against the spread as away underdogs. This is clearly not where they play their best basketball. UCF is due for a win. They match up decently well against this Utah team. And yeah, I would be very surprised here if UCF doesn't at least make this game extremely competitive. So letdown spot for Utah, get right spot for UCF. Utah sucked at home. UCF plays well at home, much better than they do on the road. Utah, really, really bad team on the road. This just seems like a no-brainer for me. So give me UCF on the short home spread here. All right, and the final game, I'm kind of going out of order here. This is technically the 4th game of the day, but I just did UCF out of order. Anyway, it doesn't really matter at all. But we have Niagara, head on the road to play Marist. I think this line's a little bit too fat. I have this modeled as a 6-point win for Marist. The slate's really not that big, but Marist has played really, really bad at home. And they're a team that's just due for so much regression. Meanwhile, Niagara's due for quite the opposite regression. They've been a pretty unlucky team versus Marist, who's been a top 3 lucky team in college basketball. Like, they're not really getting off incredible shots, but they're falling. So I think these two teams on paper are not that far apart, maybe like 80 ranking points. And when you're that bad, 80 ranking points should only be 5-6 points, maybe. We're getting Niagara here off of 2 losses. Marist has been playing pretty well. They're coming off a decent win at home against Marist, or against Canisius, which of course I was on the other side of. But I think they're kind of just rolling against these bad teams. They're not really trying that hard. They only beat Siena by 1. They beat Merrimack by 1. They beat Canisius by 8. They lost to Iona by 4. Fairfield, they lost by 3. Siena, they beat by 5. Niagara, which they already played, and they only won by 2. So we're getting Niagara here with a lot of points in a revenge spot. They just came off a rough loss against Siena, where they just lost by 34 points. I think this is the epitome of a get-right spot. Niagara, by no means, is a good team. Marist, obviously, if you look at the stats, they look like a way, way better team. But with regression, I think this line ends up becoming a little bit too fat here. So this is mostly a model spot. I do think that Niagara can keep this within the 8.5 number. All right. Well, I just saw that UNLV just lost the game by 8. The game was tied, and they gave up an 8-0 run to lose the game by 8. So really great when the, I also had San Diego State, who gave up an 11-0 run to end the game. And they were the road team, so, makes sense. But this time I got the home team collapsing, which was great. I don't know, man. I feel like I get fucked in the final 3 minutes of every game, no matter what side. If I'm on the favorite, if I'm on the home dog, if I'm on, it's always the same bullshit where the team I'm betting on implodes when it matters the most. So, despite the fact that they're recovering for like 90% of this game, they lose by 8, so it doesn't even look like it was close. Anyway, that's not important. So we have a unique game here. We have Purdue, and these are two teams that are both on my ban list that I refuse to bet. But based on the fact that they're both on my ban list, I'm assuming that it's going to cancel out. I've had no luck betting on Indy or against Indy. I've had no luck betting on Purdue or against Purdue. I'm hoping that these two forces collide, and this gives me confidence to bet on Purdue, who I think is just the better team that is fighting much harder for the tournament because they have looked terrible this year, despite being a finalist last year without Edie. I think Purdue's just a better offensive team. Indiana's going to find success on the glass, but I think Purdue, if they can get their shooters going, should win this game handedly. This is going to be a quarter unit play from here, or I don't know. I'm going to bet it, but I won't be happy about it. In the last 4 games, these are all games the model liked, but I either refuse to bet because if there's something that I didn't like about them, or whatever reason. But if you're into model underdogs, those are probably my 4 favorite for tomorrow that I haven't bet already. So those are my 6 games that I am betting on for tomorrow. If you have any questions on any other games, totals, comment them down below. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully we're due for a solid day. I really like all 6 of these spots except for the Purdue game and maybe the Niagara game, but the other 4 I actually really love. So hoping for a positive green day after I think 4 or 5 days in a row of just slight red or even. So let's see how it goes.